Imagine you are locked inside an island. The ocean surrounds you on every side. The water is freezing cold. The currents are so powerful they can pull a grown man underwater in seconds. Guard towers watch every corner. Guards check on you 12 times every single day. And the world has already decided no one gets out of here alive. Now imagine three men looked at all of that and said, "We are getting out," and they did. Or at least, maybe they did. Because that is the most chilling part of this entire story. Let us go back, way back, to an island that was never meant to be a place of hope. Alcatraz Island sits in the middle of San Francisco Bay in California. For centuries it was just a rock, a lonely, cold, windy rock surrounded by some of the most dangerous ocean currents in the entire United States. Spanish explorers in the 1700 seconds named it Isla de los Alcatrazes, which means Island of the Pelicans. Because honestly only pelicans were brave enough to live there. In the 1800 seconds, the United States military saw the island and thought, perfect, they built a military fort there. Then they turned it into a military prison. Confederate soldiers during the Civil War were locked up on that island. After that, Native American activists were imprisoned there. The island had always been a place of confinement, of punishment, of forgotten people. But the real story, the one that the whole world remembers, begins in 1934. In the 1930 seconds, America was going through a very dangerous time. Gangsters were everywhere. Al Capone ran Chicago like a king. Machine Gun Kelly terrorized the country. The government was losing the war on crime. People were scared. And the government needed to send a message so loud and so clear that every criminal in America would understand. That message was Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. In 1934, the island prison was completely rebuilt and redesigned into the most secure prison America had ever seen. New iron bars were installed, bars so thick and so strong that they were called tool-resistant. Guard towers were built at strategic positions so that every inch of the island was visible at all times. The rules were brutal. Prisoners were counted 12 times every single day. They had almost no privileges, no television, no casual conversation, limited mail, very little contact with the outside world. The government said, if you end up in Alcatraz, you are done. There is no coming back, and the public believed it. Famous criminals were sent there. Al Capone himself, perhaps the most feared gangster in American history, spent years on the rock. George Machine Gun Kelly was there. Robert Stroud, known as the Birdman of Alcatraz, was there. These were not ordinary criminals. These were the most dangerous, most violent, and most notorious men in the country. And they were all locked inside a floating fortress in the middle of the ocean. The message was working. Alcatraz was becoming a symbol of American power. A symbol that said crime does not pay. But symbols can be broken. And that is exactly what happened on the night of June 11, 1962. Before we get to that night, we need to understand three men. The first man is Frank Lee Morris. This is not your ordinary criminal. Frank Morris was born in Washington, the 500th C. He was orphaned at the age of 11. 11 years old, no parents, no home, no stability. He grew up in foster homes, drifting from place to place. He started committing crimes early. Petty theft, burglary, drug possession. By the time he was a teenager, he was already familiar with the inside of a jail cell. But here is the thing about Frank Morris that made him different from every other criminal who ever walked through the gates of Alcatraz. His IQ was 133. Let that sink in. An IQ of 133 is classified as borderline genius. Most people in the world have an IQ between 85 and 115. Frank Morris, a man who grew up with nothing, who had no formal education to speak of, who spent most of his life inside prison walls, had the intellectual capacity of a genius. Prison officials themselves noted in his files that he had superior intelligence. They called him a superior job assignment risk. In simple words, they knew that if any man could break out of Alcatraz, it was this man, and so they sent him there to keep him contained. He arrived at Alcatraz in January 1960. He was prisoner number AZ-1441, and almost from the moment he arrived, his mind began working. The second and third men are brothers. John Anglin and Clarence Anglin, these two grew up in Georgia in a large farming family, 13 children in total. Their childhood was spent moving from farm to farm, picking crops, living a hard and unstable life. They learned how to survive from a very young age. And they learned something else. They learned how to swim. Growing up near the Apalachicola River in Florida, the Anglin brothers became powerful, fearless swimmers. The water did not scare them, even very cold water. Like Morris, they turned to crime. Bank robbery became their specialty. They were caught, convicted, and sent to prison. But they did not like staying in prison. They had already attempted to escape from previous facilities before they even arrived at Alcatraz. The Bureau of Prisons actually labeled them officially as adept at escape. That is almost a compliment in a very dark way. John Anglin arrived at Alcatraz in 1960. Clarence arrived in early 1961. They were placed in cells right next to Frank Morris. And all three men already knew each other from previous time spent in prisons in Atlanta and Florida. So picture this. Three intelligent, determined, experienced criminals all placed next to each other in the world's most secure prison. The government thought it was controlling them. In reality, it was assembling a team. The plan began to take shape in December 1961. A fourth inmate, Alan West, who occupied an adjacent cell, was also brought into the scheme. West had been in Alcatraz since 1957 and knew the prison well. They began with a simple observation. Behind the cells in cell block B, there was an unmonitored utility corridor. A narrow, cramped space full of pipes and wires that ran along the back of all the cells. If they could reach that corridor, they could move freely behind the walls, invisible to the guards. But how do you dig through the wall of a federal prison? You use spoons and improvised tools made from a converted vacuum cleaner motor. Every night, after the lights went out, the men would dig. Slowly, quietly, millimeter by millimeter, they chipped away at the concrete around the ventilation grills at the back of their cells. And here is where Frank Morris showed his genius. He understood that the sound of digging could alert guards, so he used music as cover during evening practice sessions. Morris played the accordion, loud enough to mask the scraping sound coming from behind the cell walls. The guards thought it was music. It was an escape plan. To cover the holes they were making during the day when guards were watching, they used fake cardboard grills painted to look exactly like the real metal ones. Guards walked past those cells every single day and never noticed. It took months, patient, meticulous, disciplined months. But they were not just digging a hole. They were building an entire escape system. Above the cells, on top of cell block B, there was a large unguarded space, a hidden area above the ceiling. The men would climb up to that space through the utility corridor and work there in secret, building the equipment they needed for the actual escape. And what they built there is genuinely extraordinary. They needed to cross San Francisco Bay. The bay is 1.5 miles wide at the point between Alcatraz Island and the mainland. The water temperature averages around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to cause hypothermia in an unprotected person within 30 minutes. The currents are powerful, dangerous, and unpredictable. So they built a raft, not from sophisticated materials, not with any proper tools. They collected more than 50 raincoats from fellow inmates, some given willingly, some quietly stolen. They stitched those raincoats together carefully, seam by seam, to create a 6 by 14 foot rubber raft. To make those seams watertight, they used the steam pipes running through the prison as a vulcanizing tool, essentially heat sealing the rubber together. They also built life vests from the same raincoat material, and paddles, and everything they built was hidden above the ceiling, out of sight, out of reach of any guard. For their beds, they built dummy heads. These were constructed from a mixture of plaster soap, toilet paper, and real human hair collected from the prison barber shop. They painted them with flesh tone paint. They positioned them in their beds so they appeared to be sleeping prisoners. From outside the cell bars in the dim light of a prison night check, they looked completely convincing. This was not just an escape plan. This was a masterwork of engineering, psychology, and patience, planned and executed by men with no computers, no internet, no outside help, just intelligence, determination, and the desperate desire to be free. June 11, 1962. The last bed check of the night happened at 9 p.m. The guards walked past the cells. They saw what appeared to be three sleeping inmates, dummy heads on pillows, blankets pulled up because the real men were already gone. Shortly before midnight, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin slipped through the holes in the backs of their cells. They moved through the utility corridor. They climbed 3 stories up using the protruding pipes along the wall. They broke through a ventilation shaft in the ceiling. They emerged onto the roof of the cell block under the open night sky. For a moment, just a moment, they were not prisoners. They were men standing under the stars of San Francisco Bay. Then they moved. They climbed down a 50-foot bakery smokestack on the side of the building. They scaled 2 12-foot fences topped with barbed wire, and then they reached the water's edge. They inflated their raft and their life vests. They got in and they paddled out into the dark, freezing waters of San Francisco Bay. The fourth man, Alan West, was not with them. He had been too slow in completing his own wall excavation. His fake grill was not fully removed in time. He was left behind. He would later be the one to tell authorities exactly what had happened and how. But the 3 men in the water, they were gone. The next morning, June 12, 1962, a guard did his routine early morning bed check. He reached through the bars of Frank Morris's cell and pushed what he thought was a sleeping prisoner. The head rolled off the pillow and hit the floor. The alarm went off. The prison went into full lockdown. Sirens woke up everyone on the island, including the family of the acting warden who lived on Alcatraz at the time. His 15-year-old daughter later described being woken up by the siren, hearing her mother say, "Get dressed, there's been an escape." Every law enforcement agency was immediately notified. The FBI, the U.S. Marshals, the Coast Guard, State Police, the military. A massive manhunt began. They searched the bay, the shoreline, the surrounding islands, the mainland. What did they find? Pieces of a makeshift raft, some paddles, a plastic bag containing photographs, a mail order receipt, and addresses of family members, apparently belonging the escapees had taken with them. These items washed up on Angel Island, a nearby island to the north of Alcatraz, but no bodies, no men, no trace. The official conclusion came slowly. In 1979, after 17 years of investigation, the FBI officially closed its case on the Alcatraz escape. The Bureau concluded that the 3 men most likely drowned in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay. They were declared for legal purposes to be dead, but the U.S. Marshal Service never closed their case. And that distinction is very important because the FBI says they are dead. The Marshals say we are not so sure, and every few years something surfaces that makes that uncertainty very uncomfortable for the authorities. Let us talk about what many people believe happened and what the evidence actually suggests. First, could they have survived? The same experts and scientists have studied this question for decades. Hydrologists from the Netherlands use sophisticated computer modeling to recreate the currents and tides of San Francisco Bay on the night of June 11, 1906. Their conclusion was striking. If the men entered the water between 11 p.m. and midnight, the outgoing tide would have carried them not out to the open ocean, but toward Horseshoe Bay near the Marin Headlands just north of the Golden Gate Bridge, a path that a functional raft could have survived. The timing of their escape was not random, it was calculated, precise. As if Morris had studied the tides from a prison library atlas and planned the exact moment of departure. The Anglin brothers grew up swimming in cold rivers. Their bodies were accustomed to that kind of water, and they had life vests. The popular belief is that they drowned, but the evidence does not definitively prove that. Now here is where the story gets truly extraordinary. In 2013, more than 50 years after the escape, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Police Department. It was addressed to law enforcement, and its contents made investigators stop cold. The letter read, "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. I am 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely." The letter went further. The writer said he was willing to reveal his exact location in exchange for medical treatment and a prison sentence of no more than 1 year. The FBI tested the letter. They examined it for fingerprints. They analyzed DNA. They studied the handwriting. The results were inconclusive, meaning they could neither confirm nor deny that John Anglin wrote it. But the very fact that the FBI reopened their previously closed case because of this letter tells you something significant. They were not able to dismiss it. And this letter was not the only new piece of evidence. A History Channel documentary in 2015 revealed photographs that the Anglin family claimed to possess. Photographs allegedly taken in Brazil in 1975, 13 years after the escape, showing two men who bore a striking resemblance to John and Clarence Anglin. Facial recognition analysts examined the photos and noted what they described as compelling similarities. The men in the photos were older, but the bone structure, the facial features, the body proportions, they matched. A friend of the Anglin family came forward and claimed that the brothers had told him personally that they had body searched behind a departing ferry to get away from Alcatraz and were then picked up by an accomplice in a private boat. He claimed they had eventually made their way to Brazil, where they lived quietly under false identities, where they married, where they had children. The family of the Anglin brothers also released Christmas cards they claimed were sent by the brothers 3 years after the escape. Cards signed with their names. In 2024, the nephew of the Anglin brothers, Ken Whitner, published a book presenting what he describes as compelling evidence that his uncle survived, eventually made it to Brazil, and built new lives. The book reportedly references official government documents, letters from fellow Alcatraz inmate Whitey Bulger, and recorded testimony from someone who allegedly helped facilitate their escape. Now, what is the reality? What is actually happening here? The truth is, we do not know, and that is the honest answer. What we do know with certainty is this. 3 men successfully broke out of Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, the prison the United States government called inescapable. They dug through reinforced walls with spoons. They built a raft from raincoats. They built fake human heads to fool the guards. They navigated a prison that checked on its inmates 12 times a day for months without being discovered. And they disappeared into the night so completely that to this day no government agency can tell you with absolute certainty what happened to them. No bodies were ever recovered. Let me say that again. In 63 years, not a single body was ever recovered from San Francisco Bay. The FBI says they drowned, but not one piece of human remains was ever found to prove it. And here is the thing about the ocean. Bodies do not simply vanish in San Francisco Bay. The waters are studied and monitored. Other drowning victims from that era and location were found, but not Frank Morris, not John Anglin, not Clarence Anglin. Why does this story matter so much? Why does the entire world still talk about it over 60 years later? Because this is not just a prison escape story. This is a story about the human spirit. Frank Morris grew up with nothing. He was 11 years old and alone in the world. He had every reason to become nothing, and by many measures society had decided he was nothing. A criminal, a number, prisoner EZ 1441. He was sent to the island that the most powerful government on earth had built specifically to destroy the hope of escape. And he looked at all of that and refused. He refused to accept that the walls were truly walls. He refused to accept that the ocean was truly uncrossable. He used the only thing he had, his mind, and he built a way out of the impossible. The Anglin brothers brought the same determination. Their childhood of hard work and cold rivers had prepared them for this moment without them even knowing it. People root for them even today, not because bank robbery is good, not because escaping prison is something to celebrate, but because there is something deep inside all of us that responds to the image of a person or 3 people refusing to be contained by a system that has decided their fate for them. The story also exposed something uncomfortable about institutions. Alcatraz was sold to the American public as the ultimate symbol of security, of control, of the state's power over dangerous people. The government spent enormous resources building it, maintaining it, and promoting its reputation as escape-proof. Politicians and law enforcement officials used it as proof that they had crime under control, and then 3 men with spoons and raincoats walked out. Alcatraz closed permanently on March 21, 1963, less than 1 year after the escape. The official reason given was that the facility was crumbling and too expensive to maintain. Both of those things were true, but there was something else. The reputation of the rock had been damaged. The symbol had cracked. The government's inescapable prison had been escaped. And whether those men drowned in the bay or were sitting on a farm in Brazil, the story was the same. The impossible had happened. Today, Alcatraz Island is a tourist attraction. Millions of people visit every year. They walk through the cell blocks. They see the dummy heads behind glass. They stand at the water's edge and look out at the bay and wonder where did they go? Now let us talk about what may happen next. The U.S. Marshal Service will keep this case open until September 2026. That deadline is coming very soon. And as that deadline approaches, the interest in this case has intensified significantly. New documentary series are being developed. DNA testing technology that did not exist in 1962 or even 1979 is now being applied to evidence from the case. The letter allegedly written by John Anglin is still being analyzed with modern forensic tools. The family continues to speak out. New witnesses come forward. New theories emerge. And each time the question that has haunted America for more than 6 decades rises again. Did they make it? If the men are still alive today, which is almost certainly impossible given their age, Frank Morris would be nearly 100 years old, and the Anglin brothers would be in their mid-90s. That door is essentially closed by time. But the mystery is not closed. The truth of what happened on the night of June 11, 1962, after 3 men slid into the dark waters of San Francisco Bay, that truth remains buried somewhere between the depth of the ocean and a quiet life lived under a false name in a country far from home. And here is the thought I want to leave you with. Governments and institutions build walls, physical walls, psychological walls, legal walls to tell people that certain things are impossible, that certain fates are permanent, that certain systems cannot be beaten. And most of the time, most people accept that. They accept the walls as real. They accept the impossibility as truth. But once in a while, someone refuses. Someone with nothing but a spoon and a genius mind and 2 brothers who can swim in cold water looks at the wall and sees not a barrier but a puzzle. Not an ending but a beginning. Whether Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers survived or not, they did something that history will never forget. They cracked the wall. They solved the puzzle. They made the escape-proof prison look ordinary. And 63 years later, we are still talking about them. Maybe that is the greatest escape of all.